I didn't plan on assaulting the High Imperator of the Valorian Dominion tonight. Honestly, I just came for the secure server access and the shrimp tartlets. But when you're a Null, a registered nothing living in the Smog District on a diet of recycled air and synth protein, and Ryder Voss, a man whose personal net worth could buy the sun, decides to treat you like a smear of dirt on his polished floor, plans change. In the lower sectors, we have a saying, don't poke the wolf unless you have a silver bullet. I didn't have a silver bullet. I was fresh out of holy water, wolfsbane, and common sense. What I did have was a size 7 velvet stiletto with a reinforced carbon fiber heel, salvaged from a pre-war hydraulic piston. Spoiler alert, it worked better than a bullet. Welcome to Floxy's Shifter Romance Tales. Please support my channel, subscribe, like and tell me where you are listening from in the comment section. I appreciate you. Let's rewind. The night began with a distinct taste of anxiety and cheap mints, a combination that burned the back of my throat. The Celestial Solstice Gala was the most exclusive event on the planetary calendar. It was held in the Crystal Spire, a monolithic tower of glass and steel that pierced the toxic cloud layer to bathe in the unfiltered starlight above. Down in the sump, where I lived, the sky was a permanent, bruised purple, heavy with industrial runoff and the smog of a million failed dreams. Up here, above the cloud line, the universe was a terrifyingly vast expanse of black velvet and cold, hard diamonds. I stood near a pillar of holographic marble, trying to look like I belonged. I adjusted the bodice of my gown, a shimmering crimson number I'd stitched together from 3 different dresses found in the recycling heaps of the fashion district. It was tight in the ribs, threatening to cut off circulation to my liver, but in the ambient golden lighting of the ballroom, the imperfections were hidden. The fabric rippled like liquid ruby, a stark contrast to the pale, sterile aesthetic of the Valorian elite. More champagne, miss? A drone hovered by my shoulder, its chrome chassis gleaming under the chandeliers. It held a tray of flutes with mechanical precision. Keep it coming, I murmured, snagging a glass. And if you have any of those crab cakes left, swing back around. I have a metabolism to maintain. The drone beeped a polite affirmative and drifted away. I wasn't here to drink. I was Emilia Vance, master thief, queen of the scavengers, and currently invisible to the elite wolves preening around the ballroom. My mission was simple, suicidal, and absolutely necessary: get close to the primary server node, which was currently disguised as an avant-garde ice sculpture of a swan in the center of the room, upload the ghost key virus that would erase the debt records for Sector 4, and get out before anyone realized a few billion credits had vanished. Sector 4 was suffocating. The Dominion's tax levies had risen by 200% in the last quarter. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman who had taught me how to read when the schools were defunded, had lost her breathing license last week because she couldn't pay the air tax. My own brother, Jax, was working triple shifts in the filter mines, coughing up gray dust every night, just to keep our lights on. This wasn't greed. It was survival. We were drowning, and the people in this room were the ones holding the hose. I navigated the crowd, moving with the fluid grace of someone used to dodging falling debris. I dodged duchesses dripping in bioluminescent jewelry that cost more than my entire block, and generals wearing medals for wars that were fought entirely by drones. The air smelled of ozone, expensive floral perfumes imported from off-world, and the faint, metallic tang of too many apex predators in one room. The were elites. The alphas. They dominated the space, their pheromones a subtle, oppressive weight on the air. As a Null, a human with zero lycanthropic DNA, I was genetically invisible to them. I was background noise. Static. I reached the inner circle of the ballroom. The ice swan towered 10 feet high, glistening under the lights. Inside its frozen chest, I could see the faint blue pulse of the server node. It was beautiful. It was arrogant. It was perfect. I was 3 feet from the target. My hand drifted to the slit in my dress where the microdrive was taped to my thigh. Just a quick touch, a localized upload, and I could change thousands of lives. Then, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure drop, like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room by a massive vacuum. The chatter died instantly. The string quartet faltered and stopped, the cellist's bow hovering over the strings. The sea of silk, velvet, and military-grade tuxedos parted down the center of the hall, creating a wide, terrified path. Imperator Ryder Voss had arrived. I'd seen him on the holovids, of course. Everyone had. His face was plastered on every recruitment poster and tax form in the city. He was the Wolf King, the Uniters, the Iron Claw. But seeing him in person was like staring directly into a supernova. He was taller than the vids suggested, over 6 feet of terrifying genetic perfection. He was broad-shouldered, moving with a lethal grace that made the other alphas look like clumsy puppies. He was dressed in a black suit that seemed to absorb the light around him, tailored to fit a frame that was clearly built for violence. His face was a mask of bored, lethal indifference. Dark hair swept back, a jawline sharp enough to cut diamond, and eyes that were a disturbing, glowing shade of amber. He didn't walk. He prowled. Every movement was efficient, predatory. I shrank back against the buffet table, clutching my stolen champagne. Just stay still, Emilia. Be a wallflower. A wallflower with a mission. Don't look at him. But it was hard not to look. He radiated power. It rolled off him in waves, a biological imperative that forced the other wolves to lower their gazes and bare their throats. Even as a null, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Predator. Danger. Run. He moved past me, his gaze fixed on the High Council members trembling in the distance. He didn't even acknowledge the crowd. To him, we were furniture. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He was going to pass. I could still do this. But he didn't pass. Whether it was a scent, a sound, or just the capricious whim of a tyrant, Ryder took a sharp, unexpected turn toward the ice swan, my target. He cut through the crowd, his path intersecting directly with mine. I tried to step back, but I was boxed in by the buffet table. His heavy, polished combat boot landed squarely on the trailing hem of my crimson dress. Rip. The sound was sickeningly loud in the hushed room. It sounded like a bone snapping. I felt the tug, sudden and violent, then the draft against my calf as the delicate, recycled fabric gave way. The dress I had spent 3 weeks sewing by candlelight. The dress that was the only thing making me feel like I wasn't garbage. I gasped, the sudden jerk making me lose my grip on the champagne glass. It fell, tumbling in slow motion. Smash. Sticky gold liquid splashed over his pristine black boots. Shards of crystal skittered across the marble floor. Ryder stopped. The entire room seemed to inhale at once. A collective flinch. He didn't look apologetic. He didn't look concerned. He looked down at the champagne on his boots, then at the torn fabric under his heel with the expression of someone who had just stepped in radioactive waste. He lifted his foot, kicked the torn strip of my dress away like it was a used tissue, and kept walking. He didn't even look at my face. He didn't acknowledge my existence. Clean this mess, he muttered to a guard, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in my chest, dark and rich like burnt coffee. And remove the stray. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the dress. It wasn't just the mission being ruined. It was the absolute, crushing arrogance of it. It was the way he looked through me. It was Mrs. Gable crying in her dark apartment. It was Jax coming home with gray dust in his lungs. It was the Spire looking down on the sump and spitting on us every single day. Hey! I shouted. The room gasped. You don't yell at the Imperator. You don't even make eye contact unless given permission. The silence that followed was absolute. Ryder didn't stop. He was already 5 steps away, his back to me. I said, "Hey." My blood was boiling hotter than a fusion reactor. Logic left the building. Self-preservation took a holiday to the coast. I reached down, unbuckled the strap of my right shoe, and ripped it off my foot. It was a piece of engineering beauty. I'd salvaged the heel from a pre-war industrial piston. It was solid steel wrapped in red velvet. It weighed about 2 pounds. Solid. Aerodynamic. Lethal. You shouldn't do that to a lady. I screamed, my voice echoing off the vaulted crystal ceiling, raw and furious. I drew my arm back. I didn't aim for his back. I aimed for his ego. I aimed for the crown he wasn't wearing but surely felt. I hurled the shoe with everything I had. It sailed through the air, a velvet missile of working-class rage, rotating perfectly end over end. Time seemed to dilate. I watched the rotation, the arc, the inevitable destination. Thud. The steel heel connected squarely with the back of the Imperator's head. The sound was fantastic. A solid, meaty impact that resonated through the silent hall. The music stopped completely. The drones froze in midair. Even the dust motes seemed to pause in terror. A duchess near the front fainted, sliding silently to the floor. Ryder stumbled forward a step. He stopped slowly. Terrifyingly slowly, he reached up and touched the back of his head. He looked at his fingers. A tiny smear of blood. He turned around. His eyes weren't bored anymore. They were glowing a lethal, molten gold, and they were locked right on me. The pupils were blown wide, black holes swallowing the gold. His lips pulled back in a snarl that revealed canines that were far too sharp to be human. Silence is a funny thing. Sometimes it's peaceful. Sometimes it's awkward. And sometimes, like right now, it's the sound of 500 people simultaneously realizing they are about to witness a public execution. A dozen royal guards materialized from the shadows, their pulse rifles drawn, moving with the blurring speed of elite predators. Secure the perimeter, someone barked. Target acquired. Code red. Assault on the crown. Target? That was me. My survival instinct, which had apparently been on a coffee break when I threw the shoe, finally decided to clock back in. Run, Emilia. Run or die. I spun around, my one remaining heel clicking frantically on the marble floor while my bare foot slapped against the cold stone. It was a lopsided, undignified hobble sprint toward the service exit. Halt, a guard roared, the safety on his rifle clicking off. I didn't halt. I ducked under a waiter's tray, sending a cascade of synthetic caviar flying into the face of a general, and scrambled for the swinging doors. But before I pushed through, I made the mistake of looking back. I needed to know if I was about to be shot in the back. The guards were closing in, rifles raised, but Ryder raised a hand. A single, sharp gesture that froze them in their tracks. He wasn't looking at them. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at the floor, specifically at my shoe. He bent down, the movement fluid and terrifyingly graceful, and picked it up. It looked ridiculous in his large hand, a cheap, worn velvet thing against his expensive suit. He turned it over, examining the steel-reinforced heel, noting the industrial scratches, the desperate repairs. Then he did something that made my stomach drop all the way to the basement. He lifted the shoe to his face and inhaled deeply. His eyes snapped open. Even from across the ballroom, I saw the change. The anger didn't vanish. It mutated. It shifted from the cold, dismissive irritation of a king to something raw, hungry, and ancient. He looked like a wolf who had just caught the scent of a prey animal he'd been tracking for 1,000 years. He looked straight at the swinging doors. Straight at me. He didn't roar, "Kill her." His lips moved, shaping a single word that hit me with the force of a physical blow, even though I couldn't hear it over the panic thudding in my ears. Mine. Terrified, I shoved through the doors and sprinted into the kitchen. I didn't stop for the chef shouting at me in French. I kicked off my other shoe, leaving me barefoot and fast, and burst out into the cool, smoggy night air of the alleyway. I ran until my lungs burned. I ran until the lights of the spire were a blur behind me. I ran until the pavement turned from smooth heated stone to cracked, garbage-strewn concrete. Then the sirens started. Not police sirens. These were the deep, vibrating wails of the city defense system. The massive speakers mounted on the streetlights crackled to life, echoing Ryder's voice across the entire metropolis. "Lock it down." The Imperator's voice boomed from the sky, sounding less like a man and more like a god of storms. "Seal the sector gates. Ground the transports. Initiate a biosweep. No one leaves the city until I find what belongs to me." The alleyways of the sump were a maze of damp brick and flickering neon. I knew them better than the lines on my own palm. I vaulted over a rusting dumpster, splashed through a puddle of questionable glowing liquid, and scrambled up a fire escape that detached from the wall halfway up. I swung into an open window of an abandoned textile factory, rolling across the floor to absorb the impact. My feet were bleeding. My dress was ruined. My lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. But I was alive. I spent the next hour navigating the Undercity, avoiding the main thoroughfares where the drones were already swarming. The city was waking up in a panic. Hover cars were being grounded by tractor beams. Checkpoints were sealing shut with blast doors. He had locked down a city of 10 million people. For a shoe. I finally reached my building, Block 404. It was a crumbling brutalist nightmare of concrete and leaking pipes, but it was home. I slipped in through the basement ventilation shaft, shimmied up the garbage chute, which, thankfully, hadn't been used since Tuesday, and emerged in the hallway of the third floor. My apartment smelled like mildew, lemon cleaner, and desperation. It was a combination I usually found depressing, but tonight, I found it comforting because it didn't smell like alpha pheromones and impending doom. I slammed the deadbolt home, all three of them, and slid down the door until I hit the peeling linoleum floor. My chest was heaving. My feet were black with street grime and cut from the glass in the alleyways. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "Okay, Emilia, you're fine. He doesn't know who you are. You were just a blur in a red dress. A blurry, shoe-throwing ninja." I crawled over to my battered console, a jury-rigged setup of 3 different screens and a processor I'd stolen from a decommissioned sanitation droid, and flicked it on with shaking hands. Every channel was the same. Breaking news. Assault at the gala. The headline screamed in bold crimson letters. A news anchor with cybernetic eyes and a grave expression was speaking. Sources inside the spire confirmed that Imperator Voss was assaulted tonight by an unknown female assailant. While initial reports suggested a projectile weapon, palace officials are now treating the object, a reinforced velvet stiletto, as a potential biological threat. I choked on my own spit. A biological threat? It was a shoe. I bought it from a dead junker in Sector 7. The only biological threat on it was maybe some sidewalk bacteria and a little bit of pride. "The Imperator has declared a code black," the anchor continued, her voice trembling slightly. "The Royal Guard is conducting a sector-by-sector sweep. They are looking for a woman described as..." The anchor squinted at the teleprompter. "Fierce, unhinged, and possessing a dangerous disregard for royal authority." I groaned and buried my face in my hands. I wasn't an assassin. I was a thief who got angry. But to a man like Ryder Voss, there was no difference. Defiance was treason. I stood up and paced my tiny living room. 400 square feet of rot. This was my kingdom. A half-eaten packet of synth noodles sat on the counter. A pile of stolen tech parts cluttered the corner. My bed was a mattress on the floor. I needed to leave. I needed to get to the underground tunnels before they shut those down, too. If I could make it to the shadow markets, I could buy a new face from the biosculptors. It would cost me everything I had, but it was better than the dungeons. I scrambled up and ran to my bedroom, grabbing a duffel bag. I shoved in the essentials: a hoodie, 2 pairs of socks, a portable hacking deck, a nutrient bar that expired in 2042, and my stash of credit chips hidden inside a hollowed-out book on the ethics of artificial intelligence. "Think, Emilia. Where do you go?" I reached for the window latch, but my hand froze. Outside, the streetlights flickered and died. The hum of the city, usually a chaotic roar, dropped to a terrified whisper. A convoy of black, armored hover SUVs was rolling silently down my street, their anti-grav engines humming a low, menacing note that vibrated my teeth. These weren't police units. They bore the golden wolf crest of the royal house. They shouldn't be here. This was the sump. The guard never came down here unless they were bulldozing something or collecting bodies for the biofuel reactors. A loudspeaker mounted on the lead vehicle crackled. Residents of Block 404. Remain in your homes. A mandatory biosweep is in progress. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance is fatal. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. A biosweep. They weren't just looking for a face. They were scanning for DNA. And apparently, I had left enough skin cells on that shoe to lead them straight to my front door. The sweat, the friction, I had basically signed my name on the velvet. I watched through the slats of my blinds as the lead SUV stopped directly in front of my crumbling apartment complex. The door didn't just open, it glided up like a wing. Imperator Ryder Voss stepped out onto the cracked pavement. Seeing him on a screen was one thing. Seeing him here, standing amidst the overflowing dumpsters and neon graffiti of my neighborhood, was terrifying. He looked like an apex predator dropped into a petting zoo. He was still wearing his suit, though the tie was gone and the top button of his shirt was undone, exposing a sliver of throat that pulsed with aggression. The smog swirled around him, but he didn't cough. He stood there, a dark monolith of power. A captain of the guard rushed up to him, looking nervous. "Your Majesty, please let us clear the building first. It's not safe. The structure is unstable, the air quality is toxic, and the locals are." "Leave," Ryder snarled. It wasn't a shout. It was a low, vibrating growl that I could feel in the floorboards 3 stories up. It was the sound of tectonic plates shifting. "Sir?" I said. "Leave," Ryder said, his voice cold enough to freeze the smog. "I don't want your incompetent sensors confusing the signal. She's here. I can taste her on the air. Vanilla, rain, and fear." The captain bowed frantically and retreated, taking the squad with him. Ryder stood alone on the street. He closed his eyes and tilted his head back, inhaling deeply. The streetlights buzzed overhead, flickering as if his very presence disrupted the grid. I scrambled backward, tripping over my duffel bag. "He can't know. There are 50 apartments in this building. It smells like cabbage, old plumbing, and regret. There is no way he can pick out my scent amidst all this." Ryder opened his eyes. He didn't look at the building generally. He looked up. He looked directly at my 3rd-floor window. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just started walking toward the front door of the building with a terrifying sense of purpose. I ran to my door. "Lock it." "I already did." "Barricade? With what?" My furniture was made of particle board and good intentions. If he wanted to come in, he could probably just blow the door down with a sneeze. I could hear him. I could hear his footsteps on the stairs. Thud. 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 They were heavy, deliberate, and calm. He wasn't running. He wasn't rushing. He was collecting. He reached the 3rd floor. I heard the neighbor's dog, a vicious cyberhound that barked at wind, whimper, and go silent. I looked around for a weapon. My eyes landed on the kitchenette. A heavy magnetic wrench I used for fixing the leaky pipes. It was solid steel, rusted, and heavy. My only defense against the most powerful werewolf on the continent. I grabbed it, gripping the handle with both hands like a baseball bat. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the power pouring off him. I could feel his aura leaking through the cracks in the wood, an oppressive weight that made my knees want to buckle. My inner instincts, usually dormant, were screaming. "Shut up," I told myself. "We don't submit. We survive." There was no pounding on the door. No "open up, Royal Guard." Just a single, polite knock. Knock. It was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. "I know you're in there," his voice came through the wood. It was deep velvet wrapped in steel. "And I know you're holding a weapon. Put it down, little thief." I blinked. How the hell did he know that? Can Alpha smell intention? Can they smell the rust on the wrench? "Go away," I yelled, my voice cracking only slightly. "I have a contagious virus. Very catchy. You don't want this." "I have space plague. And rabies." A low, dark chuckle vibrated through the door. "Space plague? Really? Open the door, Emilia, or I will remove it from the wall. And I'd hate to damage your quaint property." He knew my name. Of course he knew my name. He probably had my DNA profile, my criminal record, my debt history, and my kindergarten report card in his pocket by now. I looked at the wrench. I looked at the window. It was a 3-story drop onto concrete. "Fine," I muttered to myself. "If I'm going down swinging. Or at least negotiating." I unlocked the first deadbolt. Click. The second. Click. The third. Click. I took a deep breath, raised the wrench to shoulder height, and yanked the door open. Ryder filled the frame. He was massive. Up close, he was overwhelming, a wall of muscle and expensive fabric and the scent of ozone and pine that made my head spin. He looked down at me, his eyes tracking from my messy hair to my bare, dirty feet, and finally to the wrench hovering near his ear. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked fascinated. "You," he said softly, "are a difficult woman to find." "And you," I snapped, tightening my grip on the handle until my knuckles turned white, "owe me for a dress." Ryder blinked. The intense, predatory focus faltered for a microsecond. "I beg your pardon?" "My dress," I said, pointing the wrench at his chest. Accusation ally. It was vintage. Recycled silk. I sewed it myself. "And you ripped it. You stepped on it with your giant, clumsy boots, and you didn't even say sorry. So before you drag me off to your dungeon or whatever, I want an apology." Silence stretched between us. The king of the Western Dominion, the alpha of alphas, looked completely baffled. He had probably expected me to cry, or beg, or faint. He definitely hadn't expected a consumer complaint about damaged goods. A slow, incredulous smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who just realized his prey has teeth. "An apology," he repeated, tasting the words like they were foreign. "And replacement costs," I added, stepping into the absurdity of the moment. "I don't take credits from tyrants. Hard currency only." He stepped over the threshold, invading my sanctuary. I stepped back, but I kept the wrench raised. "I think," Ryder said, kicking the door shut behind him with his heel, "we can negotiate a payment plan." The lock clicked into place. The sound was final. "We need to talk," he said, advancing on me. "About your aim." "About my aim?" I lowered the wrench an inch, but I didn't drop it. My aim was perfect. I hit exactly what I was targeting. A giant, tuxedo-wearing ego. Ryder didn't flinch. In fact, he looked like he was suppressing a laugh, which was infinitely more terrifying than if he had growled. He reached out, not quickly, but with a deliberate slowness that dared me to strike him. His hand wrapped around the barrel of the wrench. "I'll take that," he murmured. "Before you hurt yourself." He didn't yank it away. He just held it. I pulled. Nothing happened. It was like trying to pull a sword from a stone. Because he was a genetically enhanced alpha and I was a malnourished null, the contest of strength lasted exactly 0 seconds. I let go. "Get your things," he commanded, placing the wrench gently on the counter next to a pile of unpaid energy bills. "Am I being arrested?" I crossed my arms, trying to hide the fact that my hands were shaking. "Because I know my rights. I get a calm call and a lawyer." A cheap one, but still. You aren't being arrested, Emilia. The way he said my name, low, rough, possessive, sent a weird shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. You are being relocated. Relocated to where? A black site prison? The salt mines? To the Spire. Where I can keep an eye on you. He turned and walked to the door, expecting me to follow. And where you won't throw footwear at foreign dignitaries. I grabbed my duffel bag, mostly because I didn't want to be left behind in a room that suddenly felt very small and undefended. The walk to the car was a blur of surrealism. My neighbors were peeking out of their cracks and crevices, eyes wide. Mrs. Gable was watching from her window, clutching her oxygen mask. Imperator Ryder was escorting the girl from apartment 3B down the stairs like I was visiting royalty. When we stepped outside, the night air bit at my skin. I shivered in my thin hoodie. Without breaking stride, Ryder shrugged off his suit jacket. It was heavy, warm, and smelled like expensive scotch and deep forest rain. He dropped it over my shoulders. I don't need your coat, I protested, though I immediately snuggled into it. It was warmer than my apartment had ever been. Keep it, he said, opening the back door of the armored hover SUV. It tells them you're mine. Tells who? Everyone. The pack. The city. The world. I slid into the leather interior, which smelled like new car and absolute authority. Ryder slid in next to me. The locks engaged with a heavy thunk. As the convoy began to move, rolling away from the only life I'd ever known, I looked at him. He was staring straight ahead, his profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. You can't just keep me, I whispered. I have a life. I have a brother. He turned to me, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark cab. Your brother's shift at the mines has been cancelled. He's been transferred to a desk job in the logistics sector. Full benefits. My jaw dropped. You hacked his file? I own the mines, Emilia. I didn't hack anything. I made a phone call. You can't just buy my life, I hissed. Watch me. The drive was silent, but the air was thick enough to chew. We drove past the checkpoints, past the terrified guards who saluted the car, and up the winding private sky road to the Crystal Spire, the fortress that towered over the city. We didn't go to the dungeons. We went to the private elevator. Ryder scanned his palm, and the doors whisked us up until my ears popped. The doors opened. Welcome home, Emilia, Ryder said. Not a guest, I corrected, stepping out onto plush carpet. Home was a strong word. Gilded cage was more accurate. The penthouse was larger than my entire apartment building. The floors were marble heated from beneath. The ceilings were glass, revealing the stars that were invisible from the sump. The walls were lined with real books, paper ones, not data chips. And the view of the city was breathtaking, mostly because it reminded me how high up and trapped I was. The guest suite is to the left, Ryder said, loosening his tie as he walked toward a bar cart that looked like it belonged in a museum. But you'll stay in the master wing. I'm not sleeping in your room, I said immediately, dropping my duffel bag on a white rug that probably cost more than my kidney. I snore. And I kick. Ryder poured himself an amber liquid. There are 4 bedrooms in the master wing, Emilia. You can pick one. Just don't try to leave the floor. The elevators require biometric clearance. And the windows are reinforced polyglass. You can't break them with a shoe. So, I am a prisoner. You are a guest with restrictions. That is literally the definition of a prisoner. He ignored me, taking a sip of his drink. Dinner will be served in 20 minutes. Wash up. You look like you rolled around in a recycling chute. I rolled around in an alley to escape your goons, I shot back. And I'm not hungry. 20 minutes later, I was starving. The smell of roasted meat wafted through the massive living space. I found Ryder sitting at a long mahogany table set for 2. He had changed into a black button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to expose forearms that looked like they could strangle a bear. I sat down opposite him, still wearing my hoodie and leggings. A terrified servant drone placed a plate in front of me. Seared duck with a berry reduction. Why did you do it? Ryder asked suddenly. He wasn't looking at his food anymore. He was watching me. Why did you throw the shoe? Most people tremble when they see me. You attacked. You stepped on my dress, I said, meeting his gaze. I saved up for 3 months to buy the fabric for that dress. It made me feel not invisible. And you ruined it without even looking at me. You treated me like dirt. Ryder went still. I didn't see you. Exactly, I said, pushing my plate away. That's the problem. You don't see anyone who isn't useful to you. I see the threats, he said. I see politics. I see the economy. You don't see the people, I countered. You don't see Mrs. Gable losing her air. You don't see Jax coughing up dust. We're just numbers on your screen. I stood up. I'm not eating your fancy duck, Ryder. And I'm not your pet. You can lock the doors, but you can't make me play house. I turned to walk away, expecting him to yell. Emilia, he said. His voice was soft. Dangerous. I paused. I see you now, he said. And I haven't looked away since. I retreated to the library because it seemed like the only room without a bed or a bar. I curled up in a massive leather armchair, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger in my stomach and the frantic beating of my heart. The next 3 days were a bizarre mix of luxury and psychological warfare. I tried to hack the elevator panel on day 2. Ryder caught me. He didn't get mad. He just leaned over my shoulder and pointed out a coding error in my bypass algorithm. You forgot the encryption key for the 3rd layer, he whispered, his breath hot in my ear. I nearly short-circuited the panel out of embarrassment. On day 3, I found him playing the piano in the music room. He played with a haunting, violent intensity. When he finished, he looked at me and said, "My mother taught me." Before the rebellion. It was a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the man beneath the monster. I hated that I liked the music. By the night of day 3, I was in the library again. You missed dinner, a voice said from the doorway. I jumped. Ryder was leaning against the doorframe. He was holding something in his hand. My velvet slipper. The weapon. He walked into the room. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The air grew heavy, charged with static electricity. It was the mate bond, though I was trying desperately to pretend it was just low blood sugar. I brought your property back, he said, stopping in front of my chair. Thanks, I said, reaching for it. I'll just take that and... He pulled it back. Allow me. Before I could protest, the Wolf King dropped to one knee. My breath hitched. He was so big that even kneeling, he was nearly eye level with me. He took my bare foot in his hand. His skin was hot, calloused, and firm. A jolt of electricity shot up my leg, making my toes curl instinctively. Ryder looked up at me through his lashes. His eyes were dark, dilated. It's a bit cliché, isn't it? He murmured, the prince fitting the shoe. You aren't a prince, I managed to squeak out. You're a tyrant. And you, he said, sliding the velvet shoe onto my foot, are a brat. His hand didn't let go of my ankle. His thumb traced the arch of my foot, a slow, deliberate caress that felt incredibly intimate. I should have kicked him. I should have pulled away. Instead, I sat there frozen, burning under his touch. Does it fit? He asked, his voice dropping an octave. It fits, I whispered. He hummed, a low vibration in his chest. Good. Because I'd hate to have to hunt you down again. He stood up, towering over me again. The moment broke, but the tension remained, thick enough to choke on. Get some sleep, Emilia, he said, his eyes lingering on my lips. Tomorrow we discuss the terms of your stay. The next morning, I woke up in a bed that was essentially a cloud wrapped in Egyptian cotton. For 3 seconds, I felt amazing. Then, I remembered I was a hostage. The elevator dinged. I assumed it was breakfast. Instead, I got a walking perfume bottle wrapped in Chanel. A woman stepped out. She was stunning in an "I will ruin your credit score just by looking at you" kind of way. Platinum blonde hair, lips painted a severe shade of crimson, and a dress that cost more than my entire education. She spotted me lounging on the sofa in one of Ryder's oversized shirts, mine were in the wash, and wrinkled her nose like she smelled burning trash. "So," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice deli meat. "This is the stray." I sat up, pulling the shirt tighter around my knees. "And you are?" "Lady Violet," she announced, walking into the room without an invitation. Her heels clicked ominously on the marble. "Counselor of the Eastern Sector. Head of the noble families. And the woman who should be wearing that ring, if Ryder hadn't lost his mind over a gutter rat." I looked at my bare hand. "I'm not wearing a ring. I'm wearing socks. And honestly, they're very comfortable." Violet stopped in front of me, looking down with a sneer that probably took years of practice in front of a mirror. "Do you think you've won, little girl? Do you think because he dragged you here, you're special? Ryder is an imperator. He collects rare things. Art, cars, and apparently charity cases. Once he's bored with your novelty, he'll toss you back to the sump where you belong. Or he'll trade you." "Trade me?" "Politics, darling," Violet smiled, showing too many teeth. "The council is unhappy. They want stability. A null in the penthouse creates instability. I am stability. You are chaos." It was a good speech. Cruel, precise, and designed to make me feel small. A week ago, it might have worked. But a week ago, I hadn't thrown a shoe at a monarch. I stood up. I was shorter than her and definitely less polished, but I didn't back down. "You know," I said, tilting my head. "For a counselor, you talk a lot of trash. But underneath that expensive perfume, I smell desperation. It's actually overpowering. Is that ode to despair you're wearing?" Violet's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" "You broke into a private residence to yell at a woman you've never met," I continued, stepping into her personal space. "That doesn't scream future queen. That screams insecure ex. If Ryder wanted you, Violet, you wouldn't be standing here trying to convince me he does. You'd be with him." I sniffed the air theatrically. "And by the way, lavender and anxiety is not a good blend." Violet's face turned a blotchy shade of red. She raised her hand, her perfectly manicured claws ready to strike. "I wouldn't." A deep voice rumbled from the doorway. We both froze. Ryder was leaning against the doorframe, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder. He didn't look angry. He looked entertained. "Ryder." Violet dropped her hand, transforming instantly into a weeping victim. "This creature insulted me." I heard," Ryder interrupted, pushing off the wall. He walked past her, barely sparing her a glance, and came to stand next to me. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a shield. "She said you smell desperate." "My nose is quite sensitive, Violet, and I have to agree. It's pungent." Violet gasped, clutching her pearls. I never, the council will hear of this." "Get out," Ryder said. His voice was soft, bored, and absolutely terrifying. "Before I decide to let Emilia throw a shoe at you. And trust me, she doesn't miss." Violet fled. The elevator doors barely closed fast enough. Ryder turned to me, a slow, dark smirk spreading across his face. "Gutter rat?" "I prefer scrappy urbanite," I corrected. "You defended yourself," he noted, sounding strangely proud. "I don't need a king to fight my battles, Ryder. I've been dealing with mean girls since kindergarten." He stepped closer, the amusement fading into something heavier. "I know you don't need me, Emilia. That's the problem. By day 6, the air in the penthouse had changed. It wasn't the temperature, the climate control was set to a perfect 72 degrees, but the density. The oxygen felt thick, heavy, and hot. The deal was almost up. Ryder had promised to let me go after 7 days if I wanted to leave. And my body knew it. Every time Ryder walked into a room, my skin prickled. Every time I caught his scent, my stomach did a traitorous little flip. My inner wolf, usually dormant because of my null status, was waking up. Or maybe it wasn't a wolf. Maybe it was just me, finally realizing that the monster in the story wasn't the wolf, but the loneliness. I was packing my bag on the 7th morning. I folded the hoodie. I put the portable hacking deck back in the pocket. Then the explosion happened. Not a metaphor. A literal boom that shook the windows. The glass shattered in the far corner. The alarms blared. I scrambled out of the bedroom. Ryder was already in the living room, staring at the monitors. The city below was in chaos. Smoke was rising from the Eastern District. "What's happening?" I asked. "The council," Ryder said, his voice ice cold. "They're moving. They're claiming I've been compromised by a rebel agent. They're demanding my abdication." Violet moved faster than I anticipated. "Compromised?" I laughed bitterly. "By me? I'm eating your toast and reading your books. They don't know that. They know I shut down the city for a girl. They know I haven't killed you." He turned to me, his eyes wild. "They think you're a weakness." "Well, aren't I?" Ryder crossed the room in 2 strides. He grabbed my shoulders. "No. You are the only real thing in this entire city. You are the anchor." The elevator doors pinged. But it wasn't Violet this time. It was a squad of armed soldiers. Not Royal Guard. Council mercenaries. Voss, the lead mercenary, shouted. "Surrender the girl and step down." Ryder pushed me behind him. A low growl ripped from his chest, shaking the glass walls. His eyes shifted fully to gold. His claws lengthened, tearing through his expensive shirt. "Touch her," Ryder said, "and I will paint this room with your insides." The firefight was short and brutal. Ryder moved like a blur of shadow and violence. He was a force of nature. But there were too many of them. They had plasma suppression shields and stun batons. A plasma bolt caught him in the shoulder. He roared, stumbling back. "Ryder!" I screamed. I didn't think. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a marble bust of some dead ancestor, and chucked it at the gunman, aiming for Ryder's heart. Bonk. The mercenary dropped like a sack of potatoes. I grabbed a stun baton from the fallen man. I wasn't a soldier, but I was fast. I slid under the legs of another attacker, shocking him in the knee. Ryder looked at me, blood seeping through his shirt. He grinned, teeth bloody. "Nice throw. Shut up and fight." We fought back to back. Him with claws and fury, me with improvised projectiles and a stolen stun baton. When the last mercenary hit the floor, the room was a wreck. The pristine white rug was ruined. Ryder collapsed onto the sofa, clutching his bleeding shoulder. I rushed to him, tearing a strip from my hoodie to bind the wound. "You idiot," I whispered, my hands shaking. "You could have let them take me. You could have kept your throne." "I don't want the throne," he rasped, his hand coming up to cup my face. "I want you. The throne is cold. You are fire." The bond snapped into place. It wasn't a gentle click. It was a collision. A flood of emotion poured into me, his fear, his adoration, his absolute need. It overwhelmed my senses. I felt him. I felt his soul. "Mine," he growled. "Yours," I whispered back. "Totally. Completely. Pathetically yours." He pulled me down for a kiss that tasted like blood and victory. It was a claiming. It was a promise. The next morning, the spire was surrounded. The council had mobilized the entire army. They were broadcasting demands for Ryder's head. Drones swarmed the windows like angry hornets. We stood on the balcony, looking down at the sea of troops. The wind whipped my hair. "I have a plan," Ryder said. He was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were clear. "I go down there. I surrender. I trade my life for your safe passage. I have a shuttle prepped on the north pad." "That's a terrible plan," I said. "Worst plan ever. It's the only one that keeps you alive." "No," I said, turning to him. "I have a better one." "Does it involve throwing shoes?" "Maybe." I grinned. "I'm not a damsel, Ryder. I'm a scavenger. I know how to break things. And right now, we need to break the council's narrative. They think I'm a weakness. Let's show them I'm a weapon." I went to the closet. I bypassed the silk gowns. I grabbed the red dress, the one he had bought to replace the one he ruined. It was crimson, armored with subtle crystals, and had a slit that went up to my thigh. It looked like blood armor. I put it on. Then, I reached into the safe where Ryder kept the velvet stilettos. I slid them on. They felt like armor. They clicked on the floor with a deadly rhythm. "What are you doing?" Ryder asked, watching me with awe. "We're going down there," I said. "Together. We're going to walk right out the front door, and we're going to tell them that if they want the king, they have to deal with the queen first." Ryder stared at me. "They'll tear you apart. Let them try. I have excellent aim." We took the elevator down. The descent felt like it took hours. I checked my reflection in the chrome panel. Scavenger. Thief. Queen. The lobby was filled with press, soldiers, and the council leaders, including Violet, who looked smug. When the doors opened, a hush fell over the crowd. Ryder stepped out, looking every inch the warlord. But he didn't step out alone. He held my hand. Flashbulbs went supernova. The noise was deafening. "My name," I said, walking to the nearest microphone before anyone could stop me. I tapped it. Thump. Thump. "Is Emilia Vance. And contrary to the reports, I was not kidnapped." "Then explain the lockdown." Violet shouted from the crowd, her voice shrill. "He held you hostage. He is unstable. He shut down the city," I said, my voice amplified across the square, echoing off the buildings, "because he's dramatic." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. "And he kept me in the penthouse," I continued, "because he made a mistake. He thought he could buy my time. He thought he could order my affection." I paused, looking directly at the camera drones. He was wrong. And I told him so. Repeatedly. Usually at high volume. I threw furniture at him. "So you're free to go?" a reporter asked. "You're a Null. He's the Imperator." The power dynamic shifted, I said, the moment he realized that rank doesn't equal respect. I reached up and brushed my hair aside, revealing the fresh mating mark on my neck, a bruising, beautiful claim where he had bitten me during the bond snapping. The crowd gasped. It was undeniable proof. By ancient law, a mated pair could not be separated. "He didn't claim me because I was weak," I said, my voice ringing with steel. "He claimed me because I was the only one brave enough to tell him he was acting like a jerk. I am not a victim. I am his mate. And I'm not here to be a silent figurehead. I'm here to make sure he never steps on anyone else without looking first. I am the voice of the sump. I am the voice of the Nulls." I turned to Ryder. He looked at me with such raw, unmasked adoration that it took my breath away. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at me. He stepped forward, joining me at the podium. He didn't speak to the press. He just took my hand and raised it to his lips, kissing my knuckles in front of the entire world. "Long live the Queen," he murmured into the microphone. The crowd erupted. Not in anger, but in cheers. The people of the sump, watching on screens, saw one of their own standing next to the king. The narrative had shattered. The soldiers lowered their weapons. Violet looked like she had swallowed a lemon. As we turned to walk back into the spire, Ryder pulled me close. "You were magnificent," he whispered. "Terrifying, but magnificent." "I told you," I said, kicking off my heels and picking them up. "I have excellent aim." "So," he said, pressing the button for the penthouse. "Now that we've conquered the press, what do you want to do? Rule the kingdom? Rewrite the laws?" I grinned at him, swinging the velvet stiletto by its strap. "Actually," I said, "I'm still waiting on that cash you owe me for the first dress." Ryder laughed, a real, deep sound of pure joy that echoed through the palace halls. "I think," he said, kissing my forehead, "I can cover that."